Long gone are the times when we begged our grandmothers to stop piling food on our plates. Now we're desperately wishing for this delicious food from the past to miraculously reappear on our dinner tables. So we're going to start with a little backstory on tortellini carbonara. Otherwise, it won't make sense how your southern-raised grandmother knew one of the finest homemade Italian dishes to ever grace American soil. Tortellini and carbonara were an Italian fusion dish that were a part of modern experimentation, which was focused around blending northern Italian styles of pasta with Roman carbonara sauce. It first came out of the Emilia-Romagna region, but it really picked up when immigrants in the times of our grandparents managed to bring their tweaked editions of the dish out. It wasn't really that deep. Some pancetta, some black pepper, garlic cream, eggs, Romano and cheese, tortellini. These were the tools you needed to serve up a great plate. It got popular as a creamy pasta dish that really had a lot of heart and comfort to offer to people, and when someone like your grandma would cook it, that fact was only reinforced 1,000 times. It's a pretty interesting dish both flavor-wise and cuisine-wise, and if you're a real pasta lover, you'll want to try this one out for yourself. Bit of a weird name for a dish that's otherwise all business and no sideshows, but Zesty grilled ham is known for its tangy flavors and the marinade and citrus glaze that it tends to come coated in. Know those hot wings from KFC? The Thai chili sweet ones? Think of it like that, but instead of a sweet sauce, you have a much more, well, zestier one. Now, you don't need me to tell you that every time Americans get a ham-based showstopper, they tend to go crazy, especially in the South, where ham is consumed more than water, really. It's just that this was such a unique take on ham given the landscape of food in America, which was edging more and more towards savory flavors, that I can't really figure out why this would vanish into thin air when it had a niche going. Either way, it was a staple for summer barbecues and one of the best things you could make outdoors. You just needed some natural sweeteners, dried herbs, basic spices, citrus juices, and ham. What you got was a dish that was pretty easy to make and 10 times more fun to eat, especially if you were making it in batches for the whole family or a cookout. Okay, I know you guys are already itching for a steak, so let's start with a Swiss one, which is actually one of the smoothest steaks you'll ever try if you choose to make this recipe. It's tender, it melts in your mouth, and it's a great testament to what I just said about American taste palates becoming very savory-oriented instead of other flavor profiles. It has a lot of strong roots in Southern cuisine, and it makes use of Swiss-style cooking and herbs like bay leaves. This was the thing to make during cold winter months when you wanted to not only put some warmth in your body, but also some real energy back. And it was insanely affordable, too. You needed what? $1 or $3 to make this? And that's accounting for everything that goes into it. The flour, the garlic, the vegetables, the steak itself, the beef broth. That's a pretty good deal as far as I'm concerned. The dish itself is right up the alley of people who like soft, tender steaks that feel like they're meant for slow, pleasureful eating. Let's move on to some more casual meals, although this one has elements from both of the previous ones we just talked about. It's got ham, and it's also based on Swiss cuisine and uses Swiss cheese. The Stromboli itself is an Italian-American idea, though, and it was said to have been created in the middle of the 20th century as a replication of the Italian pastries that were becoming so popular in America. They replaced the fillings with ham and cheese, though, as Americans are so often inclined to do. Home chefs and restaurant cooks would never spare the cheese either, because they were really looking for that melty factor every time the dish was made, especially grandmas, who would go double on the cheese to pander to their lovely grandchildren, despite constant protests from parents about how they're trying to get them to eat greens. Plus, as far as doughs go, this uses pizza dough, so it's familiar enough even for the parents to try out. While this isn't the most affordable or easy-to-prepare dish, it is incredibly fun to make. Why? You get to customize. There's nothing like creating your own personal filling and making a stromboli to try it out, something that was a hobby of grandmas in the mid-20th century. You're definitely going to want to try out white wine garlic chicken if you have a knack for Italian flavors, because this takes 3 very basic elements of cooking and turns them into a masterpiece. The acidity of the wine, the richness, and the strong taste of the garlic all use a soft, tender chicken breast as their stage. It's a thing of beauty, I tell you. This is a variation of some other French classics you might have heard of before, like a coq au vin blanc. It's simple, but it's filled with elegance and style, which is what French cooking came to be known for in those eras. All you needed was broth, white wine, garlic, basic spices and seasonings, and you had yourself a wonderful meal to enjoy with a glass of champagne or wine. It was really common in European homes in America, especially in French-American communities. Not just in restaurants either, but as something to prepare for a nice day at home. Sausage manicotti is really a thing of wonder. For a long while, Americans had pondered what to do with the all-important sausage. I mean, sure, you had your hot dogs and your grills and cookouts, but how long would that really go on without getting just the tiniest bit stale? It was in times like this where recipes like sausage manicotti were lifesavers. It combined the ricotta cheese that Italian cooking is so known for in a tomato sauce all stuffed in manicotti pasta tubes, which made it have everything you could want in a dish. I'm talking about a supreme capacity for munching, flavors jam-packed into one dense packaging, and a rich sauce that added a lot of different sides to the dish. It wasn't really that hard to make either. All you needed was to nail the stuffing into the pasta tubes down, which may take a few tries, but if you keep at this dish, maybe you can get as good as Grandma was at it too, or at least close enough that it doesn't matter. One of the other meats that most Americans, especially middle-aged ones, have eaten so much in their lifetime that they could note down the entire flavor profile from memory is cod. So when cod and asparagus bakes became the next trendy thing for home chefs to obsess over all around the country, it was a pretty lucky break for everyone's taste buds. Skip to the 1970s and 80s, when America was going through a really experimental phase with its food. Suddenly it had all these big ideas and this desire for exploring the foods and tastes of other countries, like European ones and Mediterranean cuisine. Most of these cultures really prided themselves on their simple cooking and how they brought out the natural flavors that were already present in the ingredients. Cod and asparagus bakes were a lot like that, and they also lined up with the popular narrative at the time. Americans wanted healthier food. Even grandparents were becoming health conscious over their kids and started introducing meals like this more often into the family diet. Speaking of simplicity, we can't talk about it without mentioning no-fuss chicken. It's literally named after how easy it is to make. If you're a fan of straightforward cooking that doesn't take any fancy flamingos or white wine reductions, messing around with beef and chicken stock, or using crock pots, then this is a dish for you. It was at the same time as cod and asparagus bakes that a hankering for minimalist cooking became the popular demand of the masses. Things like no-fuss chicken were clearly products of that, since they had nutrition at their core while still offering a boatload of flavor despite how easy it was to make them. Chicken breasts were usually used in restaurants, but at home, thighs were preferred because they tended to be less dry and have more flavor. You had paprika, cumin, Italian seasoning, olive oil, and garlic, and one really quick and easy dish. It was the perfect thing to eat while watching TV back then, which was slowly becoming its own aspect of life in America as more and more people started eating and watching TV together. You know what really sets the tone for a special occasion at home? Pancetta and mushroom-stuffed chicken breast. It's so hard to go wrong with this dish. It's a sophisticated main meal that you can enjoy easily, but it's also one of those things you can make for a feel-good day at home. You know, it's Saturday, you're off from work, there's no one at home, you just took a shower. Life's good, but why would a dish like this be associated with comfort cooking? Wouldn't it make more sense to go out to a nice restaurant for this kind of thing? Actually, if you look at it from today's standards where the recipe is largely forgotten, then yeah, sure, it's something to dress well and get out into the city for. Back then, in the 20th century, it was something that Grandma would make really often on holidays like Christmas, Thanksgiving, or to celebrate special events at home. It could have been a raise, a promotion, an engagement, or a new baby, but it was a celebratory item on the menu. It was really the mushrooms and shallots that shined here, despite how everything else has so much going for it too, and it's because they work together to give this really strong umami flavor that doesn't feel like anything you're used to eating in America. So let's talk about orange pomegranate salmon since we're on a little bit of a fancy streak right now. You want sweet, but you also want tangy, but you don't want too much of either. A nice, perfect middle ground that takes both and creates something new with it. What do you get? Today, maybe you'd just go to Subway and create a new sandwich, or go for glazed chicken. But before that, you had dishes like these. It was a fusion that people were not used to at all, nor aware of. Nobody would have thought citrus flavors and pomegranate could work together at all, let alone with salmon. This is a taste palette that came from the Middle East and the Mediterranean. The people of the US first started looking into flavors like this because they wanted protein sources and dishes that weren't loaded with fat or covered in grease. Normally, you'd only see this in gourmet restaurants and upper-class bougie homes, but it slowly became something that people everywhere started adopting, especially those living in coastal areas where fresh salmon was always pretty available. Some people who were really confident in their cooking would even have a balsamic glaze to take it to the next level, though most in-depth recipes for this dish are gone now. Honey lemon schnitzels, on the other hand, are something you really get into when you're on television. These schnitzels first came out of Austria, in Germany, and it was those immigrants that brought them over to America, where the inclusion of honey and lemon meant for one really fancy fusion dish. This is comfort food in its purest form. It's got that crunchy, crispy, fried aspect to it since it is a fried cutlet, but it's also got a lot of tangy sweetness from the lemon glaze. The bites are always refreshing, and one is never enough. I remember when I would go to my grandma's and have some of these for lunch, it was like a feast I couldn't even dream of. Maybe it would be lost on the taste buds of kids today because of how it has some more sophisticated flavors comparatively, and veal and pork are never really favorites for children, but it has a lot going for it. There's few dishes that make those meats into a fried dish you can binge on, like hot shots or crispy pretzels, but this recipe seems to do the trick just fine. Before we keep this list going, don't you think our grandmothers were just on the top of their game when it came to cooking up a storm? It truly is correct when we say that grandma's cooking just tastes better. So here's a fun fact about why we love their cooking so much before we move on to the rest of the dishes. A survey conducted in 2023 showed a pattern amongst grandmothers using spices that have been sitting on the shelf way past their expiry date in their food. This not-so-fresh spice outlook on cooking may just be why the food they make tastes way better than the food you make using the same recipe. One grandmother even commented saying that she felt like if you really want your food to taste like a grandmother's home-cooked meal, you'll need to season it with paprika that's been stored near the stove for at least 3 years. Funny, right? We are always scared to use ingredients past their shelf life, but that never deterred our grandmothers. Keeping this fun fact in mind, let's discuss more forgotten dishes we miss. So next you have Perogi chicken supper. This dish takes juicy chicken that mixes the flavors of pierogi, which are potato dumplings with a buttery sauce and sautéed onions. You might not be the biggest dumpling fan, and I don't blame you. As far as foods from different cultures go, dumplings have comparatively taken more time to really become an established thing in America. Still, if you ever do feel like getting into the dumpling game, this Polish masterclass is a great place to start. Polish immigrants, especially housewives who were home chefs, would pass the recipe for this dish down and keep it in the family cookbook, so it became a bit of a culinary heirloom for many people. It's greatly enjoyed in the Midwest, where people really appreciate earthy flavors. Plus, the dumplings have a potato filling, but it can even be cheese or meat. So I'm sure you'll find something that suits your tastes here too, considering that pizza is an easily available item in stores and has been for a few decades now. Good plan for a boring Saturday evening? Pesto halibut, on the other hand, is something more on the seafood side of things. You take halibut fillets, which is fine, I get it. Not everyone's cup of tea, but maybe you should still keep an open mind. There's a lot of different ways to make use of a good fillet, and pesto halibut is one of the better ones. You take the pesto and halibut for one explosively seafood-oriented dish that reminds you of a perfect day by the coast, enjoying the ocean winds. It has a massive focus on freshness, like the dish just does not work properly if you don't get fresh halibut. It's ridiculously easy to prepare too, despite how it may sound, and you might be very surprised what this combination does for it. Halibut is typically prepared in bland ways that don't really play much with the flavor of the fish itself, but in pesto halibut, Everything that goes into this dish is centered around making that flavor pop and shine like it's supposed to. So why not? Give it a try. Maybe you can get an insight into why so many grandmas around the country were obsessed with this dish, and maybe you might just feel very refreshed after seeing how healthy a meal it is. Chicken cordon bleu is one of the best gifts we got from France and Switzerland. I'm not really sure who the first person or restaurant to introduce this dish into America's culinary fabric was. I just know they were doing God's work. As far as appetizers go, it's extremely hard to top a good cordon bleu. It involves chicken stuffed with ham and Swiss cheese, but the key is in the breading and frying. The pastry focus on this dish makes it feel like a casserole, with how the puff pastry wrappings have like a concert of cheese, chicken, and ham going on inside, but the crunch of the pastry is what makes it all work together. It has the same vibe as a sandwich, but in a much more gourmet way, because at the end of the day, sure, you are just eating dough, chicken, ham, and cheese all over again, but it's done in such a new way. Kind of breathes new life into an old everyday concept. And who can really say they don't love that? Not me, that's for sure. Plus, the Dijon mustard goes hard with this dish. Homestyle butter beans. Where do we even start with this one? It really is the stereotypical dish that you can associate with the comfort of driving into your grandparents' garage, stepping into the doorway, and smelling nothing but cooking done with absolute love. It's a Southern American staple, and it has been that way since the start of the 20th century. It takes lima beans, ham hock, smoked turkey, or bacon. It's your choice what meat you use, and cooks the beans until they're tender with the meat. This is one of the highlights of soul food too, and it's extremely common in African American communities in southern states. It actually became some kind of stereotype to greet newcomers to the South with a good, healthy round of butter beans, and the vegetable and chicken broth elevate the benefits of this dish even more. It's ridiculously good for your gut health. You know those dishes that really feel like they heal parts of you that you didn't know needed fixing? Home-style butter beans are exactly like that. And while there are small differences from household to household on how to make them, like the choice of meats or using hot sauce, no one can disagree that they're a go-to for when you need nothing but comfort. Corn pudding is something that Americans have been enjoying for a long time now, but tea corn pudding is a nice little take on that really gives it some extra mileage, since sometimes the classic stuff can get old. This one just uses a bit of spice to create a harmony of savory and sweet flavors. Most places in the South tend to use nutmeg as well. Cornmeal is usually used to thicken the pudding, but people can also use flour, although it's preferred you use cornmeal. Most of the earliest traces of this dish come from Native American and settler cuisine, and it makes sense since corn has been a big part of Native American culture for centuries now. It's also a bit similar to European custards, but it has a thicker and softer consistency than those. All in all, this is one of the nicest, most comforting puddings you can make on a budget and when you're short on time too. It's definitely a really popular Thanksgiving and Christmas option outside of the South as well, and many kids from the 90s can remember growing up on Grandma's famous corn pudding. So, like we were talking about earlier in the video too, America had a bit of an awakening towards the medical importance of food. You know how they say, what you put in your body is how you'll feel? Maybe they weren't really wrong about that. Okay, they weren't wrong about that at all, and by they, I mean a gazillion food scientists and studies on the effect of food on mental health. Still, this isn't about that, but it is kind of related to why this next dish got so popular. 3-bean pasta salad was something that mixed in the best things that everyone loved, which was pasta and beans, and threw it in a salad, which made everything involved all the better. The beans were more exciting because of the pasta was healthier because of the salad, and the salad didn't taste boring and awful thanks to the pasta and the beans. It's why grandmas would save this recipe for summer cookouts, picnics, and cookouts, especially because it was really easy to make this dish in bulk. We're going to take a look into one other bean dish that actually came from a place you may not have heard too much about yet, and that's West Africa. Originally, black-eyed peas were a very grassroots thing in the southern parts of America, which came as a result of the slave trade in settler times. It was very common for colonialists to take away recipes and cuisines from the places they occupied and bring them back to America. But the recipe for black-eyed peas found a place for itself on American soil too. Namely, in soul food culture and in cultural traditions that the African American community holds very dear. You take the black-eyed peas, some ham hock or bacon, and chicken broth plus bay leaves and onions, garlic and pepper, and slow cook them. The goal here is to really let those beans soak in the flavor, because otherwise you're going to end up with a bland dish, and these are anything but boring. The dish should be exploding with flavor by the time it's done. I mean, it isn't soul food for no reason, right? If you ever feel like trying out a new way to have some delicious beans, this is definitely one worth checking out. It's funny that this is what follows a dish about black-eyed peas, since this is more or less the same too. Hoppin Johns were a little bit more though. You could consider this a full-fledged meal on every level because of how much was going on in just one plate. You had smoked meat, like bacon or sausage. You had rice, which was seasoned with different spices, and it was African rice, not your typical one. Then you had the black-eyed peas, which had absorbed all this flavor and become very dense in their earthiness and umami notes. This was a dish that was associated with peace and good luck, as it was eaten on New Year's Day as a blessing for the new year. Black-eyed peas were seen as a symbol of a nice fortune, and they were a massive piece of Southern soul food and culture, which is still carried on in some parts and communities today, even though the recipe of Hoppin Johns is a thing of the past. If you went back just a few decades ago, though, you would find that nobody would ever go without these during Thanksgiving, and even as a comfort dish, they were pretty popular. Another dish that went great following a Hoppin John or a plate of peas was asparagus gratin. It was this really earthy asparagus that came dipped in this creamy, cheesy sauce, which was made with bechamel or cream sauce. The asparagus itself was topped with breadcrumbs and Parmesan or Gruyere cheese, and the dish was then baked until it was that perfect, shiny golden we all know and love. You know when the breadcrumbs have that beaming glow that just tells you they're done? That this is as good as it gets? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. See, the reason grandmas in particular really took to this dish is because it made a simple thing like asparagus, which was something they enjoyed a lot, but the family usually didn't, into this delicious full meal that even the kids would devour. It had everything you wanted to attract different kinds of age groups. The cheese, the crumbs, the nutmeg, the harmony of it all. It was definitely one of the tastiest ways to get some greens into your diet. One of the best breakfasts you can ever experience at your grandparents' house is some hot water cornbread. If no one in your life has ever put you onto the magic that this little dish can hold in it, then I feel a little sorry for you. But don't worry, showing you all the lost wonders of American cooking is what this video is for. You take cornbread and put it in hot water, which helps bind the cornmeal inside. This helps to create a chewy texture on the inside of the bread, but the outside remains golden and crispy once you bake it. It actually is another really popular element of African American and Southern food culture present in the United States. Cornbread was also something that a lot of Native American communities enjoyed heavily, so all in all, it's got some pretty strong cultural backgrounds. You would be surprised just how many people and different groups, ethnicities, and economic classes get a kick out of having some hot water cornbread for lunch or breakfast, especially when it's served alongside other things like greens, fried chicken, or beans, which are all things you can find in abundance throughout the South. Let's take a detour back to the protein side of things. Ever thought there would be a sausage dish you would have trouble pronouncing? Me neither, until I first heard of Maque choux with sausage. Despite the obvious French sound, this is actually a Cajun dish that first came out of Louisiana. It highlights the sausage by combining it with fresh corn and cooking it with bell peppers, onions, and tomatoes to create this really smoky dish. It's served with Cajun seasoning and hot sauce, and it was one of the best things the Creole people ever gave to us. In Cajun culture and in Louisiana, this dish is usually served with other classics from Cajun cooking, like jambalaya or gumbo, but it's just an outstanding way to have a sausage. I mean, sure, you can have all the New York street-style hot dogs you want, and there's definitely always a warm place for them in our hearts. However, sometimes you just need something new to shake you awake and make you remember the fun of trying out new food. Sometimes, starting with familiar ingredients done in different ways can really help with that. And Maque choux with sausage is a great example of how that holds up true no matter the era. It's just sad that in today's world, even in Louisiana or Cajun communities, you couldn't really find the dish. Another really amazing bread-based dish is fresh corn spoon bread. This is definitely going to be a new name for a lot of our viewers, and it definitely was new for me. It's a dish that has more or less completely faded out of the food scene in America today, but it used to be one of the nicest breakfasts to have. If you didn't vibe with pudding-like dishes at breakfast, then you could always have it at dinner instead. It was a local hit in states like Kentucky and Virginia, mostly because of the homeliness of the dish. It was one of those dishes that had a lot of comfort oozing out of it. Some meals are the food equivalent of warming up next to a fireplace, you know? And this was definitely better than others in that aspect. It came from Native American cooking, which is already known for giving us some of the best comfort food of all time. Cornmeal was a very popular ingredient in their culture, and in this dish, the cornmeal is mixed with butter, eggs, and milk to create a custard-like or pudding-like dish with fresh corn kernels that add a lot of sweetness. It's an incredible dish to have to unwind on the weekend or make for your family when they're coming over. And it was a recipe that grandmas held close to their hearts because of how easy and comforting it was to eat and make. Something about the smell of fresh corn with butter and milk really gets you in the mood for some much-needed rest and recovery. Okay, maybe we're getting a little too sweet for your preferences. I don't expect all of our audience to have a sweet tooth, so we have to cater to the ones who like their food a bit sour and tangy too, right? Bread and butter pickles are just the thing if that's the assignment. The sweetness that comes from the butter aside, this is a really sharp, sour, and savory meal that knocks any cravings you had for taste like that out of the park. The vinegar brine is something that'll probably really catch your attention, and the addition of new spices like mustard seeds, celery seeds, and turmeric really takes the pickle flavor up a notch. Plus, a lot of people tend to mix in onions with the dish too, which gives it an edge over other pickle dishes. It certainly beats eating them out of a jar. Why not have some fun with them if you're eating some anyway? It was thought that this was a Great Depression-era dish. Back then, pickles used to be really common as food because of how they were easy to preserve and how they lasted long. It's also really common in rural areas to have this, and some places add in cucumbers alongside the onions too. All in all, if you're looking to get into pickles or are already a dedicated fan, this blast from the past might be just what you need. So last but not least on the list we have onion souffle. Where does one even begin here? It has the flavors of a savory onion-based dish, but it has the texture and consistency of a dessert. For some people, it might come off as a pretty confusing sensation when you take that first bite. For others, it may be a very hit-and-miss kind of affair, where you can sort of see the vision people were going for, but can't really manage to click with the flavors. Either way, it's a simple but divisive dish, though I think it deserves a fair shot. You just take sautéed or caramelized onions, eggs, cream or milk, Gruyere or Parmesan butter and some flour for thickening, and follow your typical souffle making, but add onions instead. It's a pretty popular French dish, but it took a while for it to gain a following in America. When it did, though, the fans were pretty committed to the bit. They had a die-hard pasino for it, and by fans, I'm referring to a lot of grandmas and home chefs across the nation. Either way, this is an elegant side dish that you can serve at parties or French-themed celebrations. If you go into most French restaurants, you'll find that it is a pretty common appetizer too, but you may need to find a place that's known for their onion souffle to really see the vision here. There's no way this list will be complete without Spam. It was one of those few meals used by the US military to survive the Second World War. Spam is basically canned pork and ham. The soldiers needed all the protein they could get, and what better way than with this canned meat? In 1937, Hormel Foods combined pork, water, salt, sugar, and sodium nitrate and sold it off as food. However, this wartime necessity soon became a new twist on dinner tables back home. Fried Spam was made with Spam, flour or batter, and oil. It became popular during the Second World War due to its long shelf life, and its popularity lasted till the 1970s. Apart from the soldiers in war, middle and working-class civilians also ate this treat at homes and in diners. They loved it because of its long shelf life and because it was a versatile and easy-to-prepare protein source. Most veterans would remember this meal from their time in the war, just like I remember this next fried food, the fried tripe. An extremely popular staple of Route 66 in California was the California burger, a trademark of the state. However, it was actually invented much earlier, around 1926 in the state. Going into any burger joint down the coast, you could always expect lettuce, avocado, and a heaping helping of cheese on your burger. Tomato slices would also be on the burger in 9 restaurants out of 10, or else the burger was not complete. Burgers were really plain back then. They would just involve patties and cheese. California burgers were one of the first new flavors in Burger Town. Double beef patty variants came around when it got so popular, people just needed more. Nowadays, this is just known as a common burger, but back then it was the pride and joy of California. Now, squirrels aren't the only bushy-tailed animals on the list, because barbecued rabbits were the talk of the town in the early 20th century. In rural areas where game meat was more common than store-bought cuts, rabbit was a go-to option. Think of it as a tender, flavorful rabbit marinated in a tangy sauce and then grilled to perfection. It's like the barbecue equivalent of a Sunday roast, but with a bit more pizzazz. The barbecued rabbit was often seasoned with a blend of herbs and spices that set it apart from other barbecue options available. Rabbit barbecue wasn't as exotic as a squirrel, but it was still pretty uncommon. It was a staple in many rural barbecues. People would gather around the pit, sharing stories and swapping rabbit recipes. But as times changed, so did tastes. It's a shame, really. I mean, low fat, high protein, and finger-licking delicious. What's not to love? Beef Wellington, named perhaps after the Duke of Wellington, is a marvel of British cuisine that showcases culinary artistry. Imagine beef tenderloin lovingly coated with pâté and duxelles, all wrapped in a crisp puff pastry. The precision in sealing the tenderloin tightly within the pastry, ensuring it cooks to juicy perfection while keeping the pastry flaky, is what makes or breaks this dish. Served primarily at grand dinners and special occasions, it often came accompanied by rich gravies and elegant veggies. The phrase, "a feast fit for royalty," wasn't thrown around lightly, as it perfectly captured the essence of this dish. Dining on beef Wellington typically featured a moment where it was sliced right at the table, displaying the succulent meat and intricate layers. A true feast for the senses. Its grand presentation made it a memorable part of any celebratory meal. Speaking of pizzas, this next one does not just copy an ingredient, it takes the entire pizza into a burger to make the pizza burger. A thick beef patty packed between 2 pizza flatbreads and topped with pepperoni with cheese made for a controversial burger. A lot of parents especially questioned the health risks such a fatty burger might have, and they were right to. Not as much as the Aloha burger, but it definitely raised some eyebrows and some revenue alike, though that was more so for experimental fusion food joints. Taste-wise, this was not too bad though. It was extremely heavy and greasy. America would slowly gravitate towards less fatty foods and more healthier ones, so you can guess why people dropped this off their orders. Restaurants did the same with their menus around the 80s, because you cannot calorie count and have pizza burgers. First, what kind of name was Hush Puppies? The name means exactly what it sounds like. Hush puppy. It is said that back in the mid-20th century, people on fishing trips would be grilling their catch when their hounds would begin barking hungrily. To quiet them, their owners would throw bits of dry dough in the fryer and throw the fried pieces to the dogs to keep them quiet. There is another version that includes soldiers trying to quiet their dogs during a war, but many food blogs have written off that version as a myth. Hush Puppies, initially created to hush puppies, became an excellent side meal often served with fish. Hush Puppies was simply cornmeal batter fried into small golden balls. It became popular in seafood restaurants in the southern U.S. after the American Civil War, since cornbread was cheap and could be made in many different shapes. Okay, now that we've covered the respectable mutton, let's move on to something a bit more, shall we say, adventurous. Smoked squirrel. In the early days of barbecue, this little critter made quite a splash at gatherings. If you think about it, the squirrel is kind of like nature's version of a barbecue snack, small, tasty, and with just the right amount of seasoning. The smoked squirrel was typically prepared by slow smoking the meat until it was infused with a rich, smoky flavor. It was a favorite among pioneers and early settlers who needed to make the most of their resources. While it might sound a bit unusual today, it's a great example of how barbecue traditions evolve based on what's available and what people enjoy. These days, you might not see a smoked squirrel on your local barbecue menu, but it's definitely a dish that deserves a place in barbecue history. Rumaki takes a spin through the exotic with its unusual combo of water chestnuts and chicken liver, all wrapped up in bacon. Its debut in the American tiki bars of the 1950s brought a touch of the Polynesian to cocktail parties. The liver and water chestnuts get a soak in soy sauce and ginger, then it's all bundled in bacon and baked till crisp. This appetizer is a real conversation starter, known for its bold flavors and intriguing texture contrasts. It often made its appearance speared on skewers or fancy toothpicks, making it easy to grab and enjoy. Rumaki was the star at many gatherings, adding a dash of the daring to the appetizer spread and sparking lively chats among guests. You have heard of popcorn, but I bet you have never heard of corn fritters. In fact, July 16th is National Corn Fritters Day in the US. This snack is one of the many that actually originated in America. It was created by the Native Americans in the mid-20th century. That is not a surprise since corn itself originated in America. The Native Americans turned these simple corn kernels into a golden, sweet, and crispy snack that they ate at home and at local fairs and festivals. In Indonesia, corn fritters are known as perkedel jagung or bakwan jagung. Apart from the obvious ingredients, oil, corn kernels, and flour, you also needed eggs and milk to achieve this meal. You can enjoy it with cream, honey, milk, or even jam. If you plan on trying this out on July 16th this year, note that it can be high in calories and fat, but also a good source of fiber. Cajun burgers gave more steam to the trend of easy-to-make burgers that could be made at home. Ground beef patties that were fried and topped with Cajun seasoning were the best parts of eating a Cajun burger. Louisiana often had many corners that would feature Cajun cuisine, and they would have this as a reasonable but full meal. Down any alley or on any street at a Cajun food stall, people would often gather around to eat what was a delicious but affordable dish. However, nowadays, there has been a decline in the use of Cajun overall in sandwiches. Restaurants and joints that would be known for a good Cajun burger are largely a thing of the past as of today. Speaking of cost-efficient foods, chili burgers were just as popular in states throughout the 1970s. Maybe it was a phase that really appreciated spice instead of just cheese and salt. Contrarily, though, cheddar cheese was often used in chili burgers, but the difference was in the chili spread. Elevating the flavors of an already mean grilled patty, people would use red chili or green or make sauces out of bell peppers and incorporate different vegetables. Cookouts saw so much love for chili burgers back then that whether or not it was on the menu became an afterthought. Technology leaves things behind. Nowadays, it is much easier to cook better and more complex burgers, so this faded from menus across the states. Quiche Lorraine is like a savory poem from the Lorraine region of France, crafted from a lyrical blend of eggs, cream, and smoked bacon, all encased in a flaky pastry crust. It's a dish that tells a story of culinary evolution, from humble medieval origins to a beloved brunch classic. With each bite, the crisp pastry gives way to a velvety filling where the smokiness of bacon dances with the richness of the custard. It's a flexible star at gatherings, ready to impress whether served hot or cold. This dish was particularly embraced in the US during the 1950s when American cooks began experimenting more with international dishes. Quiche Lorraine stands out for its balance of taste and texture. It has graced cafe menus and home tables alike, often accompanied by a simple salad to cut through the decadence. What better way to hop back into the past than with fried frog legs? This tender treat was once popular in the South and Midwest, but it was also common in France. Fried frog legs was a marinated meal that felt and tasted like fried chicken, which explains why people liked it that much. This meal, made with frog legs, buttermilk, and flour, was popular in the 19th and 20th centuries. In fact, the eating of frog legs can be traced back to over 8,000 years ago, when archaeologists dug out cooked frog legs in England. The fried version was usually served fresh as an appetizer or main course in seafood restaurants, and people in both rural and urban settings enjoyed it. It was not eaten by everyone, though, only by adventurous eaters. I know some of you are watching this and saying, "Nah, I'll pass on this one," but you won't pass these fried oysters. Dive into the rustic heart of France with Boeuf bourguignon, a dish steeped in the history of Burgundy. This is not just any stew. It's a careful simmer of beef marinated in red wine, surrounded by mushrooms, onions, and a hint of bacon for good measure. Brought into the spotlight by none other than Julia Child, this dish has become a symbol of French culinary pride. Imagine beef, tender from a slow bath in wine, paired with a bouquet garni that infuses every bite with aromatic herbs. Served in its traditional Dutch oven, it graced many tables, especially during the chillier months, offering warmth and deep, comforting flavors. Taste the French countryside with every bite perfectly captures its essence. Simple ingredients transformed into a feast for the senses. Continuing the trend of simple burgers, we have olive burgers, which are just salty olives on top of a ground beef patty with American cheese. Easy to prepare and quick to cook, these got popular around the 1967's Michigan and really paved the way for olives to be used as a topping in burgers. Before this, you would see them, but they were not the main attraction of a hamburger. Olive burgers, coming around with a well-balanced mix of onions, bacon, and the usual flavors Americans remember having with their burgers, really made a point. Definitely a game-changer burger that made its mark in America's history with ground beef and buns, even if it did not stay for too long. Guess you could say olive burgers faded away because as time passed, olives became a regular topping for burgers, and having a separate burger called the olive burger sounded confusing on menus. Do you love apple pie? But what about a fried one? If you are an adventurous eater, you should try this. It might not look very appealing in comparison with a normal apple pie, but it would look somewhat like an empanada. It is quite delicious. Apple pies don't have a clear origin story, but they are traditional Southern desserts that brought families together during the apple harvest season in the mid-20th century. Historically, in the American South, all fried pies were known as crab lanterns, a term that dates back to at least 1770 and originated from crab apple pies that had slits for ventilation, slits that resembled a lantern. All you needed to create this old meal was dough, apple filling, oil, and sugar for dusting. It was enjoyed at family gatherings or sold at local fairs and diners with glazes and dipping sauce. Ham and cheese stuffed burger was not controversial nor experimental and is actually pretty simple. Packed to the brim with cheese and ham in soft brioche buns, a bit of deli ham and some Old Bay seasoning were all you needed. Early 2000s saw a lot of love for this versatile dish that could be incorporated in a million different ways. Smoked ham or a mix of ground beef and ham, or even grilled bacon to add a classic American twist to a dish Uncle Sam already would have devoured. However, this eventually stopped being served, and we honestly could not pinpoint one reason. But it is probably because it was not too filling. Prices are much higher nowadays, and if people are going to order, they want their stomachs full for the next 5 to 6 hours afterwards at least. All right, let's talk about something a little more dignified: venison. Now, we're not talking about Bambi here, people. We're talking about grown-up deer meat. In hunting communities, barbecued venison was once a prized delicacy. Imagine the satisfaction of bagging a deer, bringing it home, and then turning it into a smoky masterpiece. It was not just a meal. Barbecued venison offered an experience. Venison's unique taste made it a standout choice for barbecue lovers looking to break away from the usual fare. It was typically marinated in a mixture of spices and herbs to complement its natural flavor. The best part? It is lean and packed with protein. Fitness freaks would have loved it if it was on the menu still. Calls for a comeback, don't you think? Fondue bourguignon brings everyone around the pot, where bite-sized pieces of meat are sizzled in hot oil, then dipped in various sauces. This fondue variant became all the rage in the 1960s, turning mealtime into an interactive festivity. You'd need a fondue pot, skewers, and a steady heat source to keep the oil bubbly. It's not just the taste, but the experience of cooking together that made it a hit in casual gatherings, creating a buzz of activity around the dining table. This fondue variant originated from the Burgundy region in France, traditionally using the local wines along with the oil for cooking. Safety was key though, as managing hot oil and ensuring everyone had the right tools was essential to keeping the fun times safe. Fondue bourguignon was all about community and flavor, making dining a lively part of the evening. If you've ever been to a large gathering or a festive celebration, you might have encountered the grand spectacle of a whole barbecued hog, or ask your grandparents about it. They must know about this epic meal. This classic Southern barbecue tradition was especially celebrated in North Carolina, where it originated. The cooking method involved slow roasting a whole pig over an open flame or in a pit, often for up to 24 hours. Now, we're talking epic proportions. This was the ultimate show of hospitality. Neighbors, friends, and family would gather for hours, feasting on the smoked animal. It was not just a dinner party, but a whole bonding experience. But as life got busier and people moved away from extended family gatherings, the whole hog barbecue started to become less common. Oh, chicken a la king. This creamy delight, possibly whipped up first by either William King of Philadelphia's Bellevue Hotel or an ingenious chef at New York's Delmonico's around the early 1900s, truly knows how to comfort the soul. Picture a dish where tender chicken meets a velvety sauce of mushrooms, pimentos, and green peppers. The sauce? It's all about that roux enriched with cream and butter, wrapping the chicken in a blanket of comfort. Interestingly, some sources also suggest that the dish was named after King George II, adding a regal twist to its storied history. Marketed with slogans like "Cooking for Kings," it graced the tables of the well-to-do, often served on toast or nestled in a vol au vent. The dish became a familiar sight at family gatherings, symbolizing a feast of elegance at special events. Speaking of Southern traditions, this next one was a staple too. Yeah, let's turn our attention to pork jowl, an often overlooked cut of meat that's been a staple in Southern barbecue for years. The pork jowl was basically the cheek of the pig, and while it might not sound glamorous, it was packed with flavor and had a unique texture that barbecue lovers appreciated. It's fattier than bacon, but with a more intense flavor. Smoked or barbecued pork jowl was typically seasoned with a blend of spices and then cooked slowly to develop its rich, smoky flavor. Pork jowl might not be the most mainstream barbecue item these days, but it's a delicious example of how barbecue traditions make the most of every part of the pig. Following the trend of experimenting with burgers, the blue cheeseburger entered menus. Completely caked in blue cheese, the patty would come with grilled onions and mushrooms or olives for an extremely unique burger thrill. One that, early on back then in the 30s, was pretty innovative. People would usually have double patty blue cheeseburgers at family grills, and burger joints had it as their best seller. Especially in states like Kentucky and Tennessee, where practically every burger place had this dish on the menu. Blue cheeseburger was often ranging from cheap to pricey depending on which diner you visited, but the price tag did not scare people away. Sadly, that craze is a thing of the past because blue cheese has been popularized so much that people are tired of it. Days where blue cheese burgers were new and trendy burgers to try in town are a thing of the distant past. Who remembers fried brains? Don't allow the name to throw you off. Fried brains was a delicious breakfast in the southern U.S. It was made from cow or pig brains, battered and fried until golden brown. Preparing this meal was easy, and it was delicious. Think of a snack, crispy on the outside and creamy on the inside, often eaten in a sandwich. It could be taken on its own, but pairing this crunchy meal with white toast was the best way to enjoy it. Fried brains became quite popular on menus in St. Louis, Missouri, after the rise of the city's stockyards in the late 1880s. This crunchy meal was eaten with relish by the people in the southern U.S. and some parts of Europe up until the end of the 20th century. The rural people also called it calf's brains, or brain fritters. Fried brains were mostly served fresh at diners and local fairs. Unfortunately, it lost its fame after it was rumored as a possible cause of the mad cow disease. Okay, that's a bit odd, but how about fried chicken livers? Seafood Newburgh invites you to savor the ocean's bounty in a dish that marries lobster, shrimp, and scallops with a creamy, sherry-laced sauce. Born in the late 19th century, this variation of lobster Newburgh captures the essence of American seafood elegance. The preparation is a delicate operation where seafood is gently poached in butter and sherry, then draped in a rich sauce of cream and egg yolks. The result? A luxurious texture that's a symphony of creamy and briny notes, often served in puff pastry shells or beside golden toast points. Seafood Newburgh was a fixture in fine dining, offering a taste of maritime luxury that was both a visual and gastronomic delight. If you love fried chicken, you might want to come a bit closer to this. Back in the 1940s to 1970s, the people in the southern part of the U.S. loved fried chicken so much that they also ate the livers. Not only did they eat them, they fried them too. The livers were coated in seasoned flour or batter and fried till crispy. Imagine enjoying a hot, crunchy snack with a bottle of beer or whiskey after a tasking day. Even though chicken livers were loved for their amazing taste, it was often served as an appetizer with a rich sauce. Working-class families loved how easy it was to make this snack. It was also a rich source of iron and vitamin A, but also had high cholesterol content. Moving on from commonly found burgers, the peanut butter burger was introduced in diners throughout Missouri. Grilled bacon and pepper jack cheese on a hamburger patty, absolutely drenched in peanut butter. Intimidating to some, but interesting to others, people gave these a try and eventually it became very popular in restaurants. A twist from the usual, but still cheap and delicious, peanut butter burgers became a regular of dinner menus around the 1960s, but eventually they disappeared. Despite how many people would even make the burger at home with variations like beef jerky instead of bacon, it faded from dinner menus. Probably because it was not very kid-friendly, and restaurants started following that wave a long while ago for us. Have you ever wondered what passed as a threat during the Great Depression? Fried bologna did. This simple lunch was budget-friendly and provided a sense of warmth during those. It was also quite tasty. It took only 2 to 3 minutes to make, and all you needed was bologna and oil. While fried bologna could be found across the South, it must have originated from Arkansans. It later became popular in working-class households and a few diners after the Great Depression struck in the 1930s to 1960s, and people needed a cheap meal that could also serve as lunch and a snack. Fried bologna is mostly eaten with bread as a sandwich. Think of chunks of fried meat resting between soft, white bread. You might even pair it with lettuce, cheese, or fried eggs if you want a perfect experience. Blackened redfish made waves in the 1980s thanks to Chef Paul Prudhomme's magic in the kitchen. This dish is a fiery delight, featuring a fillet of redfish seasoned with a robust blend of Cajun spices, then seared to crispy perfection in a screaming hot skillet. The spices create a charred crust, locking in the fish's moisture and flavor, resulting in a dish that's both spicy and smoky. Typically served with a squeeze of fresh lemon and simple sides like steamed veggies or fluffy rice, it balances the heat with fresh, zesty notes. This preparation technique was so popular that it significantly contributed to the overfishing of redfish, leading to fishing restrictions to protect the species. Breakfast burgers are like the peanut butter burger in the sense that they involve similar use of breakfast ingredients mixed with typical burger items. Mixing grilled bacon, cheese, and burger sauce with vegetables on toasted bread made for something that was rare back then. Restaurants quickly caught on to the concept of a cheap, tasty, and healthy breakfast burger and realized its potential popularity. Soon enough, breakfast burgers became a go-to dish available readily in every diner. Given the increased popularity, different restaurants customized the burger according to their tastes. Some chefs added turkey patties and some added fried bacon instead of grilled. Breakfast burgers were served until the 90s when diners began to fade from the country, causing the burger to vanish. In the 1960s and 1970s, Italian-American communities fried their zucchini. This meal later faded off in the 1980s after serving families for over 30 years. The sliced zucchini was coated in seasoned flour or breadcrumbs and fried until crispy. Preferences vary, though. Some do not like the deep brown version and would scoop it off the oil while it's still white. Others would cut their zucchini in stripes, while some would make round shapes. Until it faded off, fried zucchini was a favorite appetizer at Italian family dinners and was even passed down in family cookbooks. Let's take a wild turn because this one is a far cry from the classic barbecue menu. But hog maw was a true barbecue favorite in its own right. Now, hog maw, or pig stomach, is exactly what it sounds like: the stomach of a pig, stuffed with a mixture of spices, vegetables, and sometimes meat, then slow-cooked or barbecued. This dish has deep roots in Southern barbecue traditions where no part of the pig goes to waste. Now, I'm not going to lie, it sounds challenging. But for those brave souls who dared to try it, it was apparently a culinary adventure. You know what they say, to each their own, so if you're a fan of this meal, I'm not judging. Stuffed bell peppers are a vibrant canvas in the culinary arts, painting a picture of simplicity and heartiness. This dish melds the robust flavors of ground beef or pork with rice, tomatoes, onions, and a medley of spices, all tucked into colorful bell peppers. Baked until the peppers are tender and the filling brims with flavor, it's a one-dish wonder that's both nutritious and satisfying. Often presented as a self-contained meal, it's been a favorite for its ability to blend convenience with flavor. The appeal stretches from its versatility, each pepper a customizable vessel for whatever fillings one might imagine. Promoted for its all-in-one convenience, it's a staple at family dinners, where it brings everyone together around a table for a meal that's as filling as it is flavorful. Did you know that in the 1960s and 1980s, fried cucumbers were a snack in some local bars? But first, these cucumbers were turned into pickles. Who came up with this? Burnell "Fat Man" Austin did. Fat Man owned a restaurant in Arkansas, the Duchess Drive-In near Atkins. Fat Man had a problem. There were many other restaurants in Arkansas, and he needed a signature dish to stand out. Well, right across the street from his drive-in was a pickle company, and so an idea was born. Fat Man coated the pickles in flour and fried them until they were crispy. He named them fried pickles and sold an order of 15 for only 15 cents. It became a hit, mainly because of its unique and tangy taste. In recent times, however, the Hollywood Cafe in Mississippi has claimed to have come up with this new snack. Chicken marbella is a dish that echoes the culinary creativity of the 1980s. Born from the pages of The Silver Palette Cookbook by Julie Rosso and Sheila Lukens. This recipe blends sweet prunes and tangy capers with olives and a generous splash of white wine, creating a medley that marries sweet with savory in an unforgettable way. Garnished with parsley, it not only tastes divine, but also looks gorgeous on a plate. Perfect for dinner parties, it allows hosts to prep ahead, marinate overnight, and simply bake before serving, making entertaining seem effortless. Its exotic mix of ingredients brought a touch of the Mediterranean to American tables, perfectly aligning with the decade's thrill for bold, worldly flavors. Chicken marbella was a fashionable choice for gatherings, seamlessly integrating into the trend of sophisticated yet easy-to-prepare dishes. Yes, fried tripe is exactly what you think it is: fried cow's stomach. Does that sound disgusting? Well, it isn't. Ethnic communities, like Italians and Mexicans, transformed cow stomachs into a crunchy dish with a unique texture in the 20th century. They simply coated boiled tripe in flour and fried till crispy, and it was delicious. Tripe, when cleaned properly, is a good source of protein. Its flavor is even used in some dishes, like menudo. The fried version was a popular dinner in many cultures, including Southern US and European cultures, and was mainly served in working-class homes or in ethnic restaurants. Fried oysters were once a coastal and southern delight in the 19th and 20th centuries. Oyster beds were abundant in the South, so it makes sense that the locals made a meal out of them. Once the shells came off, it was a party. At first, fried oysters became popular because they came at no cost at all. This snack was found in low-income homes until the 20th century. All you needed was some oysters, cornmeal, and most importantly, oil. Just like the fried frog legs, it was mostly served fresh in paper trays in seafood shacks and coastal fairs, and it was eaten with hot sauces and even in soups and salads. Seafood lovers loved it because it was a good source of protein and omega-3 fatty acids. Some locals also called it oyster fritters or cracker crumb oysters. Guacamole burgers took something that American burgers already had and cranked it up to an 11. Guacamole has been such a long-time obsession in American burger culture that it is hard to remember a period when it wasn't included. Maybe when burgers were first introduced and only ham and cheese were used. Guacamole burgers can often be found being served alongside spicy fries with avocados and jalapenos. People usually would not pair bacon with this, though some would obviously. Rather, they would kick it up even more with bell peppers. Fried onion rings also made for such a great crispy factor that completed the burger. All in all, it is definitely a burger that a more spice-oriented burger lover would go for. Guacamole as a very prominent topping is not something America is currently too fond of, so this burger has been largely forgotten and taken off of menus.